81. You can also send us a message on Twitter at Smooth981FM. Use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so please search for us on your search box on YouTube, and that is Smooth981FM, and watch and catch all the action beyond just listening to our voices.
So let's get into the action now. Our first story is from the Vanguard newspaper. INEC halts polls in Rivers as Makinde, Sanwo-Olu, others win. And the details of this story were so following reports of widespread violence, they said, and disruption of elections in River State, the Independent National Electoral Commission yesterday, after a meeting held, and they came up with a decision to suspend elections or electoral processes in River State. And the details of this story are pretty lengthy, so we advise listeners to go through the details, go through the Vanguard newspaper for this story. But what are your thoughts on this?
Rivers again.
Yes.
Forever and ever, there's always violence in Rivers. There's no election that has gone by for as long as I can remember that there's no problem in Rivers State. Why is governor is it a do or die affair for people to rule or to govern a state? Also, just watching the TVs yesterday, the intervention of so many security agencies was quite appalling. INEC officers were being tear gassed, and it's really amazing.
Well, was it a direct affront at INEC officials, or just?
Well, I think it was generally just trying to keep the peace. There were quite a number of different people trying to get into the INEC headquarters in Port Harcourt, and this came as a result of not being able to do the collations within the local government collation centers. And it's quite amazing that Rivers is always on the map for violence when it comes to election. It's sad, such a great state, so much natural resources, great individuals that come from the state, and it's just sad that every year, every 4 years, we go through it in Rivers State. Anyway, going on to other things, the biggest story for me here is Oyo State.
Yes.
Tell us why.
Well, after 8 years of APC and Ajimobi being probably the first governor in Oyo State that won elections back to back, it's not surprising to me, because in Oyo State, for as long as I can remember, since the 79 election, no party has ever retained the governorship until Ajimobi. So losing it now goes to show you the dexterity of the people of Oyo State when it comes to politicking. I'm sure they are tired of APC's 8 years and they are willing to try another 4 years of someone new.
You know, you're going to criticize Ajimobi winning again, yeah.
Exactly. So not necessarily a party issue, or
Ajimobi, whether it was a party issue or it was an Ajimobi issue, the issue just came to the point that the people of Oyo State wanted a change. So who was the change? They wanted the change for someone else that was not within that party. So whether it was, if it was Yemi Makinde running on the platform of APC, he probably would have lost because they wanted that change.
Well, they made their choice.
Yeah,
in essence. So it's really not about the individual per se, but necessarily the people's choice. But moving on from that story, Uade, thank you. Let's move on to this next one from Thisday newspaper. Arbitration Tribunal. Actually, let's jump to this next one. It says global concerns mount as army interference in the election. Folu, I'd like for you to take us through this story, because we see that following the massive and unprecedented deployment of troops and intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance aircraft across the country by the military. The military in its own stead, they're saying, well, they did not do anything unconstitutional, but there's been political outcry, or rather reactions from people even before the elections were held on Saturday, that they shouldn't be there. But your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, this story sort of touches a bit on what Wade had said earlier on, which is, again, at the epicenter of this upset and global concerns or local concerns. To be honest, we have River State once more. Now, it is interesting that of the global watchers, United Kingdom expressing the most concern over this. But I think what we really need to take a look at is the reality of the political of the political scene in Nigeria.
Mm.
There, as again Wadi mentioned, there's really no time where Rivers is not at the center of this sort of unrest. But the defense spokesman, Colonel Onyema Nwachukwu, is not incorrect by saying that the army technically hasn't done anything outside of its ambit, being that he keeps going back to sections 217 and 220 of the Constitution, which essentially empowered the president to direct the armed forces to act as a security unit in whatever way he sees fit. And it is notable or commendable to an extent that the army does go on to try and explain that, listen, there are concentric rings to this protection. We're actually there to also protect the other agencies that are present.
Yes.
But because there is so much uncertainty, because we really don't trust our security agencies for good reason as well. We've seen them act out of turn over and over again. The way in which they've tried to intervene, the way in which they've tried to keep the peace is being looked at skeptically. People are saying, well, could there have been a better way? But again, that is a real question. What is the better way? How do we deal with this? Especially when the army themselves are saying political units and actors are dressing people as army officers.
Yes.
They are paying people to carry out banditry and then blame it on the Nigerian army. Again, this is not unheard of. It's not unthinkable. This situation in Rivers, a situation that occurs in Akwa Ibom, this speaks very clearly to that, is that the violence is politically sponsored. And we cannot, as citizens of this country, continue to look the other way and expect things to be different. The definition of insanity is repeating the same actions over and over again, and somehow expecting a magical different result. The communities, the leaders in these communities have absolutely got to put their foot down and say that lives matter. The lives of the youth corpers matter. The lives of the INEC officials matter. And INEC is not excused from the mess of what occurred in certain areas during the election, because it was clear from the onset, first of all, from dates being moved, that they were not really prepared. They hadn't adequately prepared themselves. And we as a citizenry from right now should start looking towards the next 4 years to say, how can we do better? How can we empower people to vote better? How can we make it a safer process? But we have to get engaged as a citizenry. It's all well and good to point fingers and say things are going wrong, but we have a part to play in this to ensure that things get closer and closer to where we expect them to be in the future.
Yes, but yeah, sorry, there's an angle that I wanted to ask you, Folu, because I mean, if we say it's all well and good that people would blame, or the military might blame political godfathers, so to speak, of arming the thugs and equipping them with camouflage uniforms, but shouldn't these materials be, I mean, the availability of these materials in the wrong hands be probed by the military itself? Shouldn't they be held responsible for these tools, not being checked?
Safeguarded. Well, I mean,
yes.
but if you look at the story, that's what they're saying, that they are investigating this, and the person that has money is what makes the world move, unfortunately, in certain situations. So we can say camouflage is not an exclusive purvey of the military, which is why the military have such extreme reactions when they do see civilians wearing camouflage, because they understand what it can be used for. I myself have had an incident where somebody dressed as a police officer, was asking me for papers, all of this, and people from that unit, from that particular area, was outside my aunt's house towards Aja, actually cordoned off the man. They were like, who are you? What unit are you from? And it turns out that there are quite a few people who, with means, are being sponsored to look and act the part. So the military, according at least to the best of its ability from what they're telling us, are trying to curtail this sort of thing, but it's tough. The reality of Nigeria is that we see counterfeit of everything, of uniforms, of guns, of weapons. It's our sad reality, so we've got to do what we can as a citizenry to checkmate that.
Awesome. Thank you, Folu.
Right,
Let's you want to take messages here on
take
WhatsApp?
messages here. Chidozie Oboma says, good morning, guys. Please, what is the army doing in elections? To crown it all, why was the massive army deployment to Rivers? One would think that since APC lost to field any candidate, why deploy large numbers of the army to Rivers since Boko Haram is still killing and massacring innocent citizens in the north?
Because they're always shooting
Then IK here says, Folu, the military had no business at voting collation centers. The police in the footages we have seen were even being prevented from accessing the centers. The story of impersonation should be told to the Marines.
Yeah, but again, just to point out, at least in this particular story from this day, the military do say that they were not at the collation centers.
Yes.
That's something they're saying, which is a big issue. So it's a he said, they said, they said.
Yes. Thank you. Let's move on to this next one. Still on this day newspaper, Arbitration Tribunal Awards federal government $1.69 billion over dispute of brass Forcados Assets. Now, before we celebrate, Wade, please take us through the story and the implications of this judgment.
there's reason to celebrate, and it's for the first time I hear that the Nigerian government has won a dispute in an arbitration court. Thankfully, it was done in Nigeria.
Yeah.
However, if you go further down the story, you would find another arbitration that was done outside Nigeria.
So I'm wondering which one.
So that's why I said this is good news. However, the other side of it is there's 9 billion that has been owed somewhere else for an arbitration that was done in the UK, and cases that were filed in courts in the US. However, the question there will be for me is how come you're putting together a contract or an agreement that originates from Nigeria and then the arbitration point is in the UK? It's
well, because when you sign contracts, you agree a neutral
I
place where you can go and
I agree,
discuss
but
your disputes.
yeah, but it's a UK company, so is it really neutral?
Yeah, so they were not sensible.
That's the point I was getting to. So why go to the UK for arbitration? Why not go somewhere else? Why not even try and push it in Nigeria?
To be honest, you'd want to look at thinking that they will, even though it's in UK, that there will be parity.
Yes.
Less so than if it was in Nigeria.
True.
Yeah, so.
But however, the case is there. They've gone to court again to try and get another judgment. So what happened? Maybe in the next few months, you hear that Nigerian assets are being seized all over
Maybe.
US. And,
so bottom line, no need for celebration at this
well,
point.
if you get 1.69 billion and you're owing 9 billion, I don't know what the celebration really is.
Cause and effects. Now, thank you, Uade. Let's move on to this next story from the Punch newspaper. Uade, I think I'll stay with you for this one. Mob touches INEC office in Imo as resident officer goes missing. So in the details of this story, it reads that a mob has set the Independent National Electoral Commission office in Ngokbala local government area of Imo State on fire. So it was gathered the people also assaulted a security guard at the office and snatched his phone as the electoral officer escaped being attacked during the incident yesterday. I mean, this is just to spotlight some of the other, activities that occurred in this similar light in other parts of the country. But take us through the story and the implications of what the actions of those perpetrators themselves.
Well, my problem is this, and like Folu said, what exactly do we want in an election? INEC, watching the collations and all, it's even amazing that in 21st century world we are still collating on paper.
Yeah.
Votes can be
collation.
yeah.
Because the electoral act that was proposed that would have used electronic means was not approved. So
Well, it goes to show you also so many other things that has to do with policy making. In a world where today I sit down here and I send a tweet and the whole world is reading, or I send a message and Tunde can read it wherever he is, and I'm still here, and they're touching offices. If you burn the INEC office, is it going to produce the result at the end of the day? You have to blame all the parties, the politicians, the officials who are ensuring that this election should be fair and fair. It doesn't seem to be fair and fair in the long run when you look at it in detail.
But my question, Uade, should we be looking at, examining issues of free and fair? That's important. But where are the security agencies that should protect this polling units?
They're stretched thin.
They're
stretched.
And Imo, sorry, I just have to say, Imo must be the messiest APC state.
Yes.
To be honest,
What do you say to me?
It's okay. It's the record of the governor. And even when we're talking about elections, the record of the governor in participating in the elections, he ran for Senate. When the returning officer declared results, what the declaring officer said, he said, I'm under duress. The results, I was held against my will for days. Literally, my family threatened. I'm out of under duress. Come on, it's a shame, in that regard. So it's clear, and it stems from the top all the way down.
It's just like the popular saying.
When I say top, I'm referring to most
Yeah, the witch cried. the witch cried at night and the baby died in the morning. So what exactly are we looking at? Anyway.
All right, we'll take a few comments here and then move on to the next story. Chris says the military invited this to itself. If it wasn't involved in the elections at all, as it shouldn't, nobody will talk about impersonation. Anyone found in military gear around election areas will stand out. It speaks to the refusal of the APC government to properly equip the police to carry out its constitutional duties, the same ineptitude everywhere. And Solomon from Akoka says, taking inference of the gubernatorial results of your state, I hope those who believe our votes can count now know better. We're on the right track and we'd get better as we go on. Right, Tom Ane says here.
Tomane says the arbitration was agreed to be in the UK just in case any arbitration should arise. But most importantly, the anyhowness of the government is what got us here. The contract was for a hydrocarbon plant that will generate power, and the firm will generate revenue from hydrocarbon byproducts. But when Yar'Adua died, the federal government did not go ahead with the contract, even after the firm had incurred sunk costs rather.
Anyhowness.
Yeah,
Anyhowness.
And also speaks of continuation with regards to
governance.
subsequent governance and governments. Okay, move on to this one here. Sad story made obviously all over the news yesterday, and should be. Thisday newspaper reports that Buhari mourns as 2 Nigerians die in Ethiopian Airlines crash. Now, this was the Ethiopian Airlines flight 302 operated by Boeing B737-800 MAX. Folu, I'll come to you for this one. Sad news there.
A very, very heavy story, and I saw it yesterday, and my heart and my prayers go out to the families of all those who are affected. I know that this sort of story touches especially people who are frequent flyers, frequent travelers. It was really worrisome to me. I've flown Ethiopian Airways several times. I'm actually booked on a flight for them still later on in the year, and it comes at a very difficult time, especially for them, because they do have one of the best airline safety records prior to this horrific incident. Of course, our thoughts and prayers out to the 2 Nigerians as well. Professor Pius Adesomi, we saw a lot of outpouring of love for him yesterday when it came out that he was on the plane. A lot of people have such great stories of him and personal relationships with him, and of course Ambassador Abiodun Abashua as well. But I mean, the victims are traced to over 30-something countries. To have such a massive number of human lives in a single incident is shocking beyond words, and that's a direct quote from the president, and it's absolutely true. There's very little else that can be said except to note, and I think everyone has been talking about it, that the 737-800 MAX, it is the second one to go down in a few months, the first being the Indonesian airline, the Lion Air, and of course horrific stuff, 189 people lost in that situation. So Ethiopian Airways have said themselves and the stakeholders, Boeing, the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Authority, they're all getting together to investigate this, because we don't know yet if there's any direct link between the two crashes, but it is something that must be looked at, because the coincidence is a bit more than can be borne at this time. Just really sad news.
And really it sparks cause for concern, because recently we heard about some local airlines purchasing or acquiring some new Boeing jets.
Yes, but the incident has been specifically, we've got to be specific about this 737-800 MAX, because it's not the entire 737 series. And we do know that after the first crash, they had introduced upgrades to the system so that pilots could override it in certain regards. So I guess what they're probably going to be checking is whether the pilots were aware of these upgrades, whether it was the same sort of issue that caused it to nosedive, because the pilots before the crash had alerted at the Addis Ababa airport, to say, listen, they're experiencing difficulties. They did try to turn around, and then they lost signal.
Yeah, the similarities with this one and the Lion Air was it was few minutes into flight that they crashed, and also just as a follow-up for Lu, Ethiopia Airlines, China, and Cayman Airlines have actually suspended the use of that particular flight. So just to note that, but they're still investigating, and no link has been officially confirmed. We'll go on to this next story here. Sad again. New Telegraph reports that scores killed as gunmen sacked southern Kaduna villages. Just a few weeks back, we reported incidences of violence in Kaduna, and we're back again here. And Tunde, I'll come to you for this story.
Yeah, look, it's worrying, this bit of insecurity that we experience across the nation. It's been a constant theme over the past couple of years, and I mean, I'll even looking at this, I'm even half surprised at the number of, we'll get that number of stories that are being reported now, because there have been issues of underreporting, or at least we suspected that issues of underreporting. But one of the worrying things about this story, or the most worrying things about the story, is that it's not ascribed to anyone. It's just bandits. They say bandits. Down the line, they mentioned Fulani herdsmen, but that's in relation to an earlier attack and some reprisals. But there's no one saying who this is. Even when we say Fulani herdsmen, it's a very loose.
I think it's loose, and not just loose but careless, because herdsmen could be anybody. It could be from any tribe, could be any
But
sect.
they're linking it to the attack on the 11th of February.
No, exactly.
And again, like you mentioned,
but they said there were reprisals for that one. So what's this one from? And what's it for? But it goes to speak to a state of an existence, right? That people in certain parts of the nation have to deal with and live with on a daily basis, right? Constantly living in the fear of attacks coming from anywhere. Now, this one happened surprisingly on Saturday after residents had gone to vote. I wonder, is there any link? Was it that these individuals are suspected to favor one side over the other, and then there were attacks on them? Last week when I mentioned and so if it's linked and happened on election day, what happened to all the military might that was put on standby, all the helicopters and everything? When I said that, when I questioned the appropriateness of that, everyone said some people, thankfully not everyone, a few people said it was necessary. Where were they when these guys? Isn't this more important? I mean, why do we go to the polls?
Now, just to stay on that story, I'll move on. I would like to link you to the next one, which when you talk about the link to the elections, we have this news from the Premium Times, which talked about again, suspected bandits kill 16, injure many in Zamfara. Now, this almost affected the elections, but they said that thankfully it didn't, and people still went out to vote. And I will still come to you for this, but interestingly, it's worthy of note that the Minister of Defense is actually from Zamfara State, and he was asked for a statement. Can you please just take us through this?
Yeah, so I mean, let me jump forward because his statement comes towards the end, and it's a bit okay. So although he says some truth, but it's probably not the way and the manner. Let me see what he says. This is what he says. He says you can't have all you want at a time. I think that's careless. There's no nation that is 100% secure. That part is true. Now it depends on how you use your words and what it is that you communicate in the time. What he's telling, or in a sense, he's telling people that, look, just take it, and these things are going to happen, and there's nothing we can really do about it, or anything. We will, we're doing what it is that we can. I think that's inappropriate. People have lost life. People continue to lose loved ones and lose property. It's not enough for you to say these things happen anyway. It's just like, previously, not just the defense minister, we've had leaders who said careless things like these terrorist attacks happen all across the world. It's now our turn. I think it was JJ that said that
and
we should
accept
deal
that
with
things like this will happen.
That's absolutely that's nonsense. The lawmaker from that state, it's clear. It shows where his mind is. He's thankful that despite the attacks, people still came out to vote. And I'm like, goodness, come on, that is so careless. Gosh.
All right, now something just to point out a few things that the Minister of Defense said, and I'd like to seek your thoughts on this one. The first thing he said, some of the things he recommended as a solution to this was establishing a helicopter landing base there for surveillance. And then the second part is that people should this was a very interesting statement, that people should play their own part. Let's go back to community policing, where you see things and you report to your leader, the chief leader, or the chiefs in the town. This is quite interesting coming from the man who has the custodian for defense, and military in Nigeria.
So community policing or community surveillance, it's not a bad thing, and it's almost global, right? It's not bad. The only thing I can say about the helicopter part and I just see money. Security is an industry.
Bingo says it's a blatant lie that votes do not count in this country. The results of the election in Oyo have lent credence to this fact that our votes do count. Now, the people of Oyo rejected Ajimobi, he said, in all ramifications, and they had their say through the ballots. To some people, as long as the candidate they support does not win, then the votes have not counted, and they go about with the ridiculous assertion. With the second crash of the new Boeing 737-800 MAX, I think Boeing should be thinking of recalling the planes for a thorough check, as it is done in the automobile industry. Lulu from DI says, saying the military shouldn't be involved in election security is denying the reality of where we are as a nation. Of course, it would be best if the military stayed in the barracks, but we all know, or should know, that the police today is overstretched and under-equipped to deal with the violence that occurs in our elections.
Yeah. All right. We'll go on to this one. Folu. Another unfortunate. Well, this one I don't know. I'll call it good news or so. Multinational troops kill 40 Boko Haram insurgents recover arms. This report is in the Guardian.
I think the good news of it is the collaboration that we're seeing between the countries. So we have Niger, and we have Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Cameroon. Obviously, all battling the Boko Haram insurgents that are terrorizing all these nations. Actually, so just again for Nigerians, I know sometimes when we talk about Boko Haram, we believe that this is a problem that we alone are dealing with, and it's not. The reality is the tentacles of this stretch far beyond our lands, which again gives credence to the assertions by military at different points where they say, listen, there are other world terrorist organizations that are involved in this, so it's a larger scale problem than at first appears. The other thing that should actually give us reason for concern is the note that they have been and continue to attack military bases, because that's part of how these Boko Haram insurgents were killed. So Antigua said that the Boko Haram terrorists operating along the Kamadogu River between Niger and Nigeria attacked troops locations in Gueskeru, and it is these sort of attacks that really concern me, because he did say that the troops showed valor and gallantry, they fought fiercely and defended their location, but we are seeing more attacks on military locations, and that in itself should be a cause for concern. So it would be good to know what the military is doing in terms of information and intelligence sharing and gathering to try and prevent and forestall some of these attacks, because at the end of the day we are having battle weary soldiers, or having soldiers that have been on the front line for a very long time, and if the terrorist resources are as unlimited as they sometimes seem, especially because it's an ideology, and the conditions that allow this ideology to thrive are still very present in these different areas, then they know that it's just a matter of time, that you just keep throwing yourself. If you have that many people, just keep throwing the people at the troops until you wear them down.
Wasn't that a bit worrying that as a nation would possibly our military strength cannot match that of a terrorist organization?
It is worrying, but again, it's not unique to us. We have to understand that terrorism, the nature of warfare has changed dramatically over the centuries, and terrorism is a new type of war that all countries are struggling with. Again, I have to keep reminding people that there's no country in the world where terrorist activities have started that it's completely stopped. It just doesn't exist. It's a different type of warfare. So we've just got to dig in deep and brace ourselves, and remember that we as a people as well are going to affect the outcome of this, and how our troops stay positive, how we keep feeding into the troops. So we're a very big part of this fight. So do remember to salute a soldier you see today. I know they're not very popular people, but do remember that they are fighting for
very
our
important
lives.
Points right there, because many times we cast aspersions at the military, say we complain, but we do need to applaud them in cases like this where they're fighting and they pay the ultimate price for our safety and security. A final story here: federal government seek measures to stem volatility in equities markets, and this is on the Vanguard newspaper.
Yeah. Well, the biggest part of this story is that we have a new acronym. Yes. CAMI, and it's called CAMI, Capital Market Plan Implementation Council. Don't we just love them? Because, and the reason why I say it's the biggest part is because they talk. It's not, I can't even call it a good talk, because they don't describe how they will do it. They just say we intend to expedite on capital markets. It's devoid of how. They want to increase domestic retail investors, devoid of how. They say they want to set up a national savings committee. I mean, that committee will be set up for the government itself to save. Because if you're asking the populace to save, I mean, the question would then be how much disposable income do they have to save? So, they should tell us how.
Kami.
Tell us how.
Kami sounds nice. So Tammy Lola from Ikeja says, the way our leaders address us show the disdain they have for us. As the aviation professional continues, as I mourn with those who have lost loved ones in air crashes. However, I will appeal to the media to refrain from speculating on the cause of the crash. There are people who dedicate their lives to finding out why air accidents occur and prevent future occurrences. Antonio Ayo says, well, all hail the Northern region. He says they prove to vote for candidates, not party. They went for performance and integrity. And he says, he goes on to say some other things that would gladly decline.
All right. Chris here says, is it just me, or does anyone else see the brazen militarization of our politics while PMB looks the other way? Are these the actions of a Democrat?
Great question.
Great
question.
Sheon says people die on international flights. Presidents have given statements. People die in attacks in Kaduna. President has kept mute. It's okay. I don't know how we compare both, but yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Lucky here says Oyo State is the gateway. It's very obvious that votes do count.
All right, Lagos, let's be civil in our comments and please respect human life. We'll pray for the dead and may their souls rest in perfect peace.
Amen.
Thank you. Special thanks to our analysts who stepped in this morning. Folu is at Folu Storms on all social media platforms.
Yeah.
Good morning. And special thanks to Tunde at Big Coast. You can find him up on Twitter at Big Coast as well as Uade Ahimie. He is at Re-Inc. Niger 2017. It's a tongue twister handle, but you get used to it. Coming up next, Lagos, 8:15 will be time for Locker Room. Let's talk about Arsenal and the achievements so far. Good morning, Lagos.